The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor of my garage. It was past midnight, and I was elbow deep in the engine of my '98 Ford pickup, trying to fix a transmission leak that had been bothering me for weeks. The house was supposed to be quiet. Jessica had gone to bed hours ago, claiming she had an early morning at the law firm, but her voice drifted through the thin walls, clear as a bell on the cool October air. "You know I can't just cut you out of my life, Ethan. We have too much history together." I froze, my hand still wrapped around a socket wrench. Jessica was on the phone, and she was using that soft, intimate voice she used to reserve for me during our early dating years. The voice that made my chest tight and my palms sweat back when I was a 25-year-old mechanic trying to win over a law student who was way out of my league. "My husband doesn't understand what we had," she continued, and I could hear her pacing in our bedroom above the garage. "He thinks love just stops when you sign divorce papers. But you and I both know it doesn't work that way." My jaw clenched. Ethan Morrison, her college boyfriend, the real estate hotshot who drove a leased BMW and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The guy she dated for 3 years before we met, the one she claimed was just a friend whenever his name came up in conversation. "I miss you too," Jessica whispered, and something cold settled in my stomach like a stone. "I know it's complicated, but my ex will always have a place in my life. David needs to accept it." David. That's me. David Chen, owner of Chen's Auto Repair, the guy who could rebuild an engine blindfolded but apparently couldn't see what was happening in his own marriage. I set down my tools and wiped my hands on an old rag, moving quietly toward the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see the soft glow of light coming from our bedroom. Jessica's silhouette moved back and forth behind the curtains. "You always knew how to make me feel special," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "David tries, but he doesn't get me the way you do. He's so practical, so focused on fixing things that aren't broken." The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days fixing other people's problems while my own marriage fell apart right under my nose. "Tomorrow at the cafe sounds perfect," Jessica continued. 1 o'clock, just like old times. "And Ethan? Wear that cologne I used to love." I stood in my own kitchen, listening to my wife plan what sounded suspiciously like a date with another man. The house we'd bought together 5 years ago, the place where we'd talked about starting a family, suddenly felt like foreign territory. The call ended, and I heard Jessica's footsteps moving toward the bathroom. I slipped back into the garage, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to storm upstairs and confront her immediately, but another part, the part that had learned patience from years of diagnosing tricky engine problems, told me to wait, to gather more information before making any moves. The next morning, Jessica was all smiles and coffee kisses, just like every other Tuesday for the past 8 years. "How's the truck coming along?" she asked, adjusting her navy blue blazer in the hallway mirror. She looked beautiful, as always, shoulder-length blonde hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, every inch the successful attorney she'd worked so hard to become. "Getting there," I replied, watching her face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. Nothing. She was either an excellent actress or completely comfortable with whatever was happening between her and Ethan. "I have a lunch meeting today," she said casually, grabbing her leather briefcase from the counter. "Might run a little late." "Work meeting?" I asked, testing the waters. "Client development. You know how it is?" She kissed my cheek, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume, the kind she usually saved for special occasions. "Don't wait up if I'm late tonight. This case is really heating up." After she left, I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the coffee mug she'd left behind. It had a small lipstick print on the rim, deep red, the color she wore when she wanted to make an impression. I called my shop and told my assistant manager, Tommy, that I'd be in late. Then I drove to downtown Edgewater, parking across the street from Bella Vista Cafe, the trendy little place where Jessica apparently planned to meet her client. At exactly 1 o'clock, I watched my wife walk into the cafe. She'd changed clothes since morning. Gone was the professional blazer, replaced by a flowing red dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She looked around nervously, then smiled and waved at someone in the corner booth. Ethan Morrison stood up to greet her, and my hands tightened on the steering wheel. He looked exactly like I remembered from the few times we'd run into him around town. Tall, perfectly groomed, with that artificial confidence that comes from selling overpriced houses to desperate families. He wore a charcoal gray suit and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. But it was what happened next that made my blood run cold. Jessica didn't shake his hand or give him a polite hug. She melted into his arms like she'd been waiting for this moment all day. His hands lingered on her waist, and when they separated, he brushed a strand of hair from her face with the familiarity of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. They sat down across from each other, leaning in close, talking in animated whispers. Jessica laughed at something he said. That genuine, throaty laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. When the waitress brought their drinks, Ethan reached across the table and covered Jessica's hand with his own. She didn't pull away. I sat in my truck for 45 minutes, watching my wife have what looked like the most romantic lunch of her life with another man. When Ethan walked her to her car, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. Quick, familiar, and unmistakably romantic. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a real kiss, the kind that meant something. That night, Jessica came home at her usual time, cheerful and chatty about her day at the office. She asked about my work, complained about a difficult client, and suggested we order Chinese takeout for dinner. She was the picture of a devoted wife, except for the fact that she'd spent her lunch hour kissing another man. "How was your client meeting?" I asked as we ate lo mein from paper containers on our couch. "Productive," she said without missing a beat. "I think we're going to land the account." I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the supportive husband while my mind worked overtime. Jessica had always been good at compartmentalizing. It's what made her such an effective lawyer. Apparently, it also made her an effective cheater. After dinner, I excused myself to the garage, claiming I wanted to finish the work on my truck. Instead, I sat on an overturned crate and tried to process what I'd witnessed. My wife was having an affair. Not just an emotional affair, but something physical. Something that involved secret phone calls and intimate lunches and kisses that lasted just a beat too long. The smart thing would have been to confront her immediately, to lay my cards on the table and demand an explanation. But something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe curiosity, maybe the mechanic in me that needed to understand exactly how broken something was before attempting to fix it. I decided to wait and watch, to see how deep this rabbit hole went before making any moves. It was a decision that would change everything. 3 days later, I couldn't take it anymore. The pretending, the fake smiles over morning coffee, the way Jessica hummed while she got dressed for work, it was eating me alive. I'd been carrying the weight of what I'd seen at the cafe, and it felt like trying to breathe with a concrete block on my chest. I found my moment on Friday evening. Jessica was in our bedroom, fresh from a shower, applying that expensive moisturizer she ordered online. She was wearing my old college t-shirt, the one she'd claimed years ago because it was perfectly broken in. The domestic scene should have been comforting, but all I could think about was how she'd looked at Ethan, how comfortable they'd seemed together. "Jess, we need to talk." She glanced up from the mirror, catching my reflection behind her. "Sure, what's up? You look serious." I sat down on the edge of our bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. "I saw you on Tuesday, at Bella Vista." Her hand froze halfway to her face, the bottle of moisturizer suspended in midair. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, and I saw something flicker across her features. Not guilt, exactly, but calculation. "I don't know what you think you saw, David, but I saw you kiss him." My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. "I saw you hold hands. I heard you on the phone Monday night, talking about how much you missed him." Jessica set down the moisturizer and turned to face me fully. Instead of the shame or remorse I'd expected, her expression hardened into something I barely recognized. "So you were spying on me? Following me around like some kind of stalker?" I was trying to understand why my wife was lying to me about lunch meetings. She crossed her arms, and I could see her switching into lawyer mode, the same cool, analytical approach she used in court when she was about to destroy an opposing witness. "Ethan and I are friends, David. We have history. Just because you're insecure doesn't mean I have to cut him out of my life. Friends don't kiss like that. It was just a peck. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked our small backyard. The maple tree we'd planted on our second anniversary was turning brilliant red, its leaves catching the last rays of autumn sunlight. It seemed impossible that something so beautiful could exist in the same world where my marriage was falling apart. "Don't gaslight me, Jessica. I know what I saw." She sighed, the sound heavy with irritation rather than regret. "Fine. Yes, Ethan and I have been spending time together. Yes, we're close. But that doesn't mean I'm cheating on you." Then what does it mean? It means that some relationships transcend traditional boundaries. Ethan understands me in ways that you never have. We connect on a level that has nothing to do with my marriage to you. The words hit like a physical blow. Listen to yourself. You're talking about emotional intimacy with another man like it's perfectly normal. Or maybe it should be normal. Maybe the problem isn't that I care about Ethan. Maybe the problem is that you're too narrow-minded to understand that love doesn't fit into neat little boxes. I turned back to face her, studying this woman I'd been married to for 8 years. When had she become a stranger? When had her eyes grown so cold when she looked at me? You're having an affair, Jessica. Call it whatever you want, but that's what this is. I'm having a friendship with someone who knew me before I became David's wife. Someone who sees me as more than just the person who splits the electric bill with you. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Is that really how you see our marriage? As a business arrangement? I see our marriage as something that doesn't have to define every relationship in my life. You want me to be this perfect, devoted wife who only has eyes for you, but that's not who I am. That's not who I've ever been. I want you to be faithful. I want you to honor the vows we made. Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. Vows? David, we promised to love each other, not to stop loving everyone else. You're asking me to cut off a part of myself to make you feel secure. I'm asking you to choose, him or me. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Jessica stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options, calculating the cost of each possible response. That's not a choice I'm willing to make, she said finally. Ethan will always have a place in my life. Accept it, or we can end this marriage and stay friends. But I won't be controlled. Friends don't kiss, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we have different definitions of friendship. I felt something break inside me then. Not just my heart, but something deeper. The foundation of trust that had held our relationship together for nearly a decade crumbled in the space of that single conversation. You're right, I said quietly. We do have different definitions. I define friendship as caring about someone without betraying the person you promised to love above all others. You apparently define it as having your cake and eating it too. Don't be dramatic, David. This doesn't have to change anything between us. It changes everything. I walked toward the bedroom door, then paused with my hand on the frame. I need some time to think about this, about what kind of marriage I'm willing to accept. Take all the time you need, Jessica said, already turning back to the mirror. But my relationship with Ethan isn't going anywhere. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. I spent that night in the garage, not working on my truck, but sitting in the darkness, trying to process what had just happened. Jessica hadn't denied the affair. She'd redefined it. She'd made me the villain for expecting fidelity, painted herself as the victim of my narrow-minded expectations. But what hurt most was the realization that she felt no guilt about what she was doing. She wasn't torn between two loves or struggling with a difficult choice. She simply wanted both of us, and she expected me to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention she was willing to throw my way. By morning, I'd made my decision. If Jessica wanted to redefine our marriage, then I was going to redefine my response. She'd chosen to keep Ethan in her life, despite my objections and despite what it was doing to our relationship. Now it was my turn to make a choice. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a student of my own marriage, observing Jessica with the same methodical attention I brought to diagnosing engine problems. The difference was that I'd always loved fixing cars. There was something satisfying about identifying a problem and solving it. Watching my marriage disintegrate required a different kind of focus, one that left me feeling hollow and angry. Jessica made no effort to hide her relationship with Ethan anymore. She took calls from him in front of me, spoke about their lunch meetings with casual indifference, and even mentioned that he'd given her advice about a case she was working on. He's always been good at reading people, she said one evening as we ate dinner in our kitchen. It's what makes him such a successful realtor. Is that what we're calling it now? I asked. She gave me a look of practiced patience, the same expression she probably used with difficult clients. David, I thought we'd moved past this jealousy phase. Ethan is part of my life. Fighting about it isn't going to change that. What she didn't know was that I'd stopped fighting and started documenting. I'd always been good with technology. You had to be in the auto repair business these days, with cars becoming more computer than engine. So when Jessica left her laptop open on our kitchen counter while she showered, I didn't hesitate to take a look. Her email was a goldmine of information. Lunch plans with Ethan, dinner reservations at restaurants I'd never heard of, and a thread of messages that made my stomach turn. They weren't explicitly sexual, but they were intimate in a way that felt like a violation of everything Jessica and I had built together. I keep thinking about what you said yesterday, read one message from Jessica to Ethan. You're right that some connections transcend conventional relationships. What we have is special, and I'm tired of feeling guilty about it. Ethan's response was equally revealing. You deserve to be with someone who appreciates all of you, not just the parts that fit into his narrow worldview. David will never understand what we have. I screenshot everything, saving the images to a secure folder on my phone. If Jessica wanted to play games with definitions and boundaries, then I was going to play by a different set of rules. The real breakthrough came when I discovered that Jessica had been using our shared cloud storage to back up her phone. She'd probably forgotten about the automatic sync feature, but it meant that every text message, every photo, and every voice memo was accessible from my laptop. The text messages were damning. Conversations about missing each other, plans to meet at hotels for private talks, and discussions about their shared frustration with my possessiveness. But it was the photos that really told the story. Pictures of Jessica and Ethan at restaurants I'd never been to, selfies taken in what looked like a hotel room, and images of gifts he'd given her, jewelry I'd never seen her wear, flowers that had never made it to our house, and a silk scarf that she'd claimed was a work bonus. I spent hours going through everything, building a timeline of their relationship that stretched back nearly 6 months. It had started as innocent coffee meetings, progressed to lunches and dinners, and eventually became something that involved hotel rooms and expensive gifts. The voice memos were the worst part. Jessica had apparently been recording notes for herself, probably for therapy or personal reflection, but she'd forgotten to delete them from the cloud. Listening to my wife analyze her feelings for another man, hearing her compare Ethan favorably to me in every possible way, was like being slowly poisoned. "Ethan makes me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible," she said in one recording. "David is a good man, but he's so predictable, so safe. With Ethan, I feel like the woman I was before I settled into this comfortable, boring life." Settled. Boring. The words echoed in my head as I sat in my garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always brought me peace. Jessica saw our life together as something she'd compromised on, a consolation prize she'd accepted while dreaming of something better. But it was the final voice memo that pushed me over the edge. "I know I should choose," Jessica's voice said through my phone's speaker. "David deserves better than a wife who's in love with someone else. But I can't give up what Ethan and I have. Maybe there's a way to have both. Maybe David will learn to accept that love doesn't have to be exclusive." In love with someone else. She'd said it so casually, like she was discussing the weather or planning a grocery list. My wife was in love with another man and was trying to figure out how to keep both of us without having to make any difficult choices herself. That night, I called my old friend Marcus Webb, who'd become a divorce attorney after his own marriage fell apart 3 years earlier. We met at O'Malley's, a dive bar on the outskirts of town where the beer was cheap and the lighting was dim enough to hide the expression on my face. "You look like hell," Marcus said, sliding into the booth across from me. He was wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, a far cry from the sharp suits he wore in court. "I feel worse than I look." I told him everything. The phone calls, the lunch meetings, the emails and text messages and voice recordings. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or taking notes on a cocktail napkin. "How much evidence do you have?" he asked when I finished. "Enough to wallpaper our bedroom." "Good. New York is a no-fault divorce state, but having proof of adultery can still be useful, especially when it comes to dividing assets and determining spousal support." "I don't want her money, Marcus. I just want out." "What you want and what you're entitled to are two different things. Jessica makes significantly more than you do, right? Corporate law versus auto repair." I left Marcus's office with a fire in my gut I hadn't felt in years. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and half-formed plans. For months, I'd been walking around like a ghost in my own life, swallowing every insult, every late night, every dismissive wave of Jessica's hand when I dared to ask where she'd been. Now the fog was lifting, and what I saw underneath made me furious. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Sleek modern lines, manicured lawn, the expensive outdoor lighting Jessica had insisted on, but it felt foreign, like I was visiting someone else's life. I let myself in quietly, careful not to wake her. The marble foyer echoed under my shoes. Her designer purse still hung on the hook by the door, her heels kicked off carelessly beneath it. Everything screamed money, status, the life she'd built on both our backs, while reminding me, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that it was mostly hers. Upstairs, she was asleep on her side of the king bed, silk eye mask in place, one bare arm flung across my pillow as if claiming territory, even in dreams. The soft glow of her phone on the nightstand showed 3:47 a.m. Still charging, still within reach. For a moment, watching the slow rise and fall of her shoulder, I felt something close to grief. 8 years of marriage. The late-night talks when we were broke newlyweds. The way she used to laugh at my stupid jokes. The plans we'd made for kids, travel, growing old in this ridiculous house. Then I heard her voice again in my head, cool, amused, utterly certain, on that voice memo to her best friend. "I think I'm actually in love with him, Liv, like the kind where you know you're going to blow up your whole life and it still feels worth it." And just like that, the grief curdled into resolve. I slipped downstairs to my office and closed the door. The room had always been my sanctuary. Dark wood shelves, comfortable leather chair, a desk big enough to spread out projects. Jessica called it my man cave, with that condescending lilt she'd perfected over the years. Tonight, it became command headquarters. First, the evidence. I'd been careful. Screenshots of texts between her and Ethan, graphic, intimate, planning weekends away disguised as conferences. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals I'd never authorized. Transfers to an account in only her name. The voice memo backed up in 3 separate cloud locations. Photos from the private investigator, Jessica and Ethan leaving his downtown loft at dawn, her head on his shoulder, the two of them at a rooftop bar, her laughing at something he whispered while his hand rested possessively on her thigh. Hotel receipts charged to her corporate card for rooms booked under his name. I printed everything, organized it into folders, labeled them meticulously. Then I scanned it all again for digital copies. Marcus had warned me, never keep the only set where she could find and destroy it. I emailed encrypted archives to myself, to Marcus, and to a new Gmail account I created under a name she'd never recognize. By the time the sun came up, I had a timeline. 6 months of deception, starting with late nights at the office, and escalating to full-blown double life. I'd even found the lease agreement for the apartment Ethan kept across town, the one Jessica referred to in texts as our place. She'd co-signed it, with community funds. I brewed coffee, but couldn't drink it. My stomach was knotted with adrenaline and something darker. Not just anger, rage at how thoroughly she'd played me, how she'd weaponized her income against me in every fight. I pay for this life, Alex. Maybe show a little gratitude. How she'd rolled her eyes when I suggested couples counseling, saying I was overreacting and insecure. All while carrying on with a man 10 years younger who told her everything she wanted to hear. At 7:30 a.m., I heard the shower start upstairs. Jessica's weekday routine: workout, shower, espresso, out the door by 8:15 to beat traffic downtown. I waited until I heard the blow dryer, then carried my folders back upstairs and placed them neatly on the kitchen island next to her travel mug. I wrote a single post-it and stuck it on top. We need to talk tonight. A she came down in her power suit, tailored navy blazer, silk blouse, heels that cost more than my monthly take-home. She looked flawless, confident, untouchable. When she saw the folders, her step faltered for half a second, just long enough. "What's this?" she asked, voice light, already reaching for deflection. "Everything," I said. "Every text, every photo, every lie. I've made copies. My attorney has copies." The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly, years of boardroom battles showing. "Alex, whatever you think you know. I know you're in love with Ethan. I know you've been planning to leave me once you figure out the finances. I know about the apartment, the secret account, the lease you co-signed with money from our joint savings." She opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in years, Jessica was speechless. "I'll be at my brother's tonight," I continued. "You can stay here or go to Ethan's. Doesn't matter to me. But Marcus is filing papers tomorrow, and yes, we will be requesting spousal support. You wanted to remind me every chance you got that you earn more. Congratulations. Now you get to share?" I picked up the overnight bag I'd packed while she showered and walked toward the garage. "Alex, wait." Her voice cracked. The Ice Queen mask slipped, revealing panic underneath. "Can we at least talk about this like adults?" I paused at the door. We could have talked like adults 6 months ago when I asked what was wrong. You chose lies instead. Now we talk through lawyers. I left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse in the rear view. Jessica slumped against the island, folders scattered, looking suddenly small in her expensive suit. At my brother's house that night, I slept better than I had in months. No more wondering, no more pretending, just the clean, sharp edge of a future I would build on my own terms. Jessica texted twice. "We can work this out." I made a mistake. I deleted both without replying. The papers were served 2 days later at her office. I heard from a mutual friend that she cried in the conference room. For a moment, I felt that old flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered her voice memo again. How certain she'd sounded. How little remorse. The flicker died. This time, I wasn't going to be the understanding husband. This time, she would learn what consequences actually felt like. I chose Friday afternoon to serve Jessica with the divorce papers. She'd be tired from a long week at the law firm, her guard down as she transitioned from work mode to weekend relaxation. I wanted her off balance when she realized that her carefully constructed double life was about to collapse. Marcus had done excellent work. The petition for divorce was thorough and damning, citing adultery as the cause for the breakdown of our marriage. Attached were selected pieces of evidence, enough to prove my case without revealing the full extent of what I'd discovered. I was saving some ammunition for later. Jessica arrived home at her usual time, 6:30 p.m., looking polished and professional in a black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. She was scrolling through her phone as she walked through the front door, probably reading messages from Ethan. "Hey," she said absently, not looking up from her screen. "I'm going to change, and then we can figure out dinner. I'm thinking Thai food? Actually, we need to talk first." Something in my tone made her look up. I was standing in our living room, still wearing my work clothes, holding a manila folder that contained the divorce papers. "You look serious," she said, setting down her purse and briefcase. "Is everything okay?" I handed her the folder without a word. Jessica opened it with the casual confidence of someone who reviewed legal documents for a living. I watched her face change as she read the first page, confusion giving way to shock, then anger, then something that looked almost like fear. "What is this?" she asked, though we both knew exactly what it was. "Divorce papers, and a petition for an at-fault divorce based on adultery." She flipped through the pages, her lawyer's training taking over as she scanned the legal language and evidence attachments. When she reached the printed emails and text messages, her face went pale. "How did you get these?" "Does it matter? The question is whether they're accurate." Jessica sank into our leather armchair, the same one where we'd cuddled and watched movies during happier times. She was still holding the papers, but her hands were shaking slightly. "David, this is extreme. We can work through this without lawyers and courts and all this legal drama." "Can we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've already made your choice. You told me that Ethan would always be in your life, that I needed to accept it or walk away. So I'm walking away. But I never said I wanted a divorce. I said we could work something out, find a way to make everyone happy." I sat down on the couch across from her, maintaining the distance that had grown between us over the past few weeks. "Jessica, listen to yourself. You're talking about making everyone happy in a situation where you're having an affair. There is no version of this where everyone gets what they want. It's not an affair, if I'm honest about it. I never lied to you about caring for Ethan. You lied about lunch meetings. You lied about work events. You've been sneaking around for months, using our shared accounts to buy gifts for another man, meeting him in hotel rooms while I thought you were working late." Her eyes widened. "You've been spying on me, going through my private messages, tracking my movements. That's not the behavior of a loving husband, David. That's the behavior of a stalker. That's the behavior of a man who realized his wife was lying to him and wanted to know the truth." Jessica stood up abruptly, beginning to pace around our living room like a caged animal. I could see her mind working, trying to find an angle that would let her maintain control of the situation. "Okay, yes, I should have been more transparent about my relationship with Ethan. But filing for divorce? This is nuclear, David. This will destroy both of our lives. You destroyed our marriage the moment you decided that your feelings for Ethan were more important than your vows to me. My feelings for Ethan don't diminish what I feel for you. Love isn't a zero-sum game. Marriage is." She stopped pacing and stared at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked truly vulnerable. Not calculated or strategic, just scared. "I don't want to lose you," she said quietly. "I know I've handled this badly, but I don't want to lose what we have." "What do we have, Jessica? Really? You've told me that I'm boring, that I don't understand you, that Ethan connects with you in ways I never could. You've been planning a future with him while treating me like a roommate who splits the bills. That's not fair, isn't it? When's the last time you looked at me the way you looked at him at that cafe? When's the last time you talked to me the way you talked to him in those voice memos?" Her face crumpled. "You listened to my private recordings?" "I listened to my wife talking about being in love with another man and trying to figure out how to keep us both. Do you have any idea how that felt?" Jessica sat back down, the fight going out of her all at once. "I never meant for it to happen this way. Ethan and I, we have history. When he came back to town and reached out to me, it brought up all these old feelings. I thought I could handle it, keep it separate from our marriage. But you couldn't." "No, I couldn't." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of 8 years together pressing down on both of us. I thought about our wedding day, how radiant Jessica had looked in her white dress, how certain I'd been that we were building something that would last forever. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I'm sorry for the lying, for the sneaking around, for making you feel like you weren't enough. You deserved better than that." "Yes, I did. Is there any way we can fix this? Can we try counseling or take a break or something?" I looked at the woman I'd loved for nearly a decade, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimpse of the person I'd married. But it was too late for glimpses. Too much had been said, too much trust had been broken. You made your choice when you decided that having Ethan in your life was worth risking our marriage. Now I'm making mine. Jessica nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. What happens now? Now we get divorced. We divide our assets, we figure out the logistics, and we move on with our lives. You can have your relationship with Ethan without having to sneak around, and I can find someone who actually wants to be married to me. And if I end things with Ethan, if I choose you? I considered the question, imagining a world where Jessica cut ties with her ex and we tried to rebuild what we'd had. But the trust was gone, and without trust, we had nothing. It's too late for that. Even if you ended things with him tomorrow, I'd always wonder when the next Ethan would show up. I'd always be waiting for you to decide that I wasn't enough again. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I never said you weren't enough. You didn't have to say it. You showed me every time you chose to text him instead of talking to me, every time you lied about where you were going, every time you looked at him like he was the answer to all your problems. She didn't argue, because we both knew I was right. I'll need to find a lawyer, she said quietly. That's probably a good idea. Marcus Webb is representing me, so you'll want someone else. Marcus? Your friend Marcus? David, he hates me. He's going to try to destroy me in court. He's going to represent my interests. If that feels like destruction, maybe you should think about why. Jessica stood up, still holding the divorce papers. I need some time to process this. I'm going to stay at Sarah's tonight. Sarah Mitchell, her best friend from law school, who'd never liked me and had probably been encouraging Jessica's affair from the beginning. That's fine. Take whatever you need. She walked toward our bedroom, then paused at the bottom of the stairs. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, and when I asked you to stop, you told me to accept it or leave, so I'm leaving. Jessica nodded and went upstairs to pack a bag. I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life we'd built together, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. For the first time since I'd discovered Jessica's affair, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't playing the role of the understanding husband or the jealous spouse or the man trying to save his marriage. I was just being honest about what I wanted and what I was willing to accept. And what I wanted was a divorce. 3 months later, I sat across from Jessica and her attorney in a sterile conference room at Marcus's law firm. The mediation process had been brutal but efficient. Jessica's affair was well documented, and her lawyer had advised her to settle rather than risk a trial that would air her dirty laundry in public. Jessica looked different. Thinner, more fragile, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. The confident, polished woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who looked like she'd been through a war and lost. The final settlement agreement, Marcus said, sliding copies across the table to Jessica and her attorney. Mrs. Chen will retain the house, but will buy out Mr. Chen's equity stake at current market value. Mr. Chen will keep his business and all related assets. Spousal support will be paid by Mrs. Chen to Mr. Chen for a period of 2 years, given the disparity in income and the fault-based nature of the divorce. Jessica's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Holbrook, reviewed the documents with professional detachment. My client agrees to these terms. I looked at Jessica, waiting for her to object or try to negotiate, but she just nodded silently. The fight had gone out of her weeks ago, around the time Ethan Morrison had been arrested for real estate fraud. That had been an unexpected bonus. While investigating Jessica's affair, I'd stumbled across some irregularities in Ethan's business dealings. Forged documents, inflated property values, and kickbacks to mortgage brokers. A few anonymous tips to the right regulatory agencies had brought his house of cards tumbling down. Ethan was currently facing federal charges and had lost his real estate license. His assets were frozen, his reputation was destroyed, and according to the local gossip mill, he'd tried to contact Jessica for help, only to discover that she wanted nothing to do with him now that he couldn't provide the glamorous lifestyle she'd been attracted to. There's one more thing, Marcus said, producing another document. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Both parties agree not to discuss the details of their marriage or divorce publicly, including on social media or with members of the press. This was my addition to the settlement. I didn't want Jessica writing tell-all blog posts or giving interviews about our toxic marriage. She'd lost the right to control the narrative when she'd chosen to have an affair. Everything looks in order, Patricia said. If there are no objections, we can execute the agreement today. We signed the papers in silence, the only sound the scratching of pens and the shuffle of documents. When it was over, Jessica and I were no longer married. 8 years of shared history reduced to a stack of legal papers and a check for my share of the house equity. As we prepared to leave, Jessica caught my arm in the hallway outside the conference room. "David, can we talk? Just for a minute?" I looked at Marcus, who shrugged and said he'd wait for me in his office. Jessica and I walked to a small seating area near the elevators, sitting in uncomfortable silence for a moment. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," she said finally, "but I want you to know that I really did love you. I still do, in my way." "Your way of loving people is pretty destructive, Jessica." "I know. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I sabotaged the best thing in my life. She thinks I have issues with commitment, with allowing myself to be truly vulnerable with one person. That's something you should have figured out before you got married. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the lying, for the cheating, for making you feel like you weren't enough. You were always enough, David. The problem was with me." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but all I saw was genuine regret. It was too little, too late, but it was something. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I don't know. Start over, I guess. Maybe move to a different city, get a fresh start somewhere that doesn't have so many memories." "What about Ethan?" Jessica's expression hardened. Ethan was a fantasy, a midlife crisis wrapped up in expensive cologne and smooth talk. When things got real, when he needed actual support instead of just offering romantic dinners and hotel rooms, he disappeared. I threw away my marriage for a man who turned out to be a criminal and a coward. There was a bitter irony in that. Jessica had convinced herself that Ethan offered something I couldn't. Excitement, passion, a connection that transcended conventional relationships. In the end, he'd offered nothing but legal troubles and public humiliation. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, and meant it. I was angry at Jessica, probably would be for a long time, but I didn't wish her ill. I just wanted her out of my life. "I hope you do too. You deserve someone who appreciates what an incredible man you are." We stood up, and for a moment it looked like Jessica might try to hug me. Instead, she extended her hand for a formal handshake. "Goodbye, David." "Goodbye, Jessica." I watched her walk to the elevator, her heels clicking on the marble floor of the law firm's lobby. When the doors closed behind her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. 6 months later, I was rebuilding my life from the ground up. The divorce settlement had given me enough money to expand my auto repair shop and hire 2 additional mechanics. Business was booming. Word had gotten around about Jessica's affair and Ethan's arrest, and the community had rallied around me in a way that was both touching and embarrassing. I'd also started dating again, cautiously and with the help of a therapist who specialized in trust issues. Her name was Linda Rodriguez, and she was a high school English teacher with a laugh that reminded me what genuine happiness sounded like. She knew about my divorce, about Jessica's affair, and she didn't try to fix me or analyze my past relationship. She just accepted me as I was, damaged but healing. One evening, as Linda and I sat on the back deck of my house, the house I'd bought after selling the one I'd shared with Jessica, she asked me if I regretted how everything had played out. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you tried to fight for your marriage instead of ending it?" I thought about the question, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sometimes. But then I remember that Jessica made her choice long before I made mine. She chose Ethan over me, excitement over stability, fantasy over reality. I just finally accepted what she was telling me. Do you think she regrets it? Probably. But regret doesn't undo betrayal. It doesn't rebuild trust. Jessica showed me who she really was, and I believed her. Linda nodded, understanding in the way that only someone who'd been through their own difficult divorce could understand. "I'm glad you did. If you'd stayed with her, we never would have met." I reached over and took her hand, marveling at how easy it was to be honest with someone who didn't require me to pretend or perform or accept unacceptable behavior in the name of love. "Jessica told me once that love doesn't fit into neat little boxes," I said. She was wrong. Love does fit into boxes. Boxes labeled trust, respect, fidelity, and commitment. When someone refuses to stay inside those boxes, they're not offering you a more enlightened relationship. They're just offering you pain. Linda squeezed my hand. "Some people think that having boundaries means you're not open to love. Really, it means you're not open to being destroyed by it." As the sun disappeared behind the trees, I thought about Jessica, probably starting her new life in whatever city she'd chosen for her fresh start. I thought about Ethan, facing federal prison time for his crimes. I thought about the marriage I'd lost and the life I'd gained. I'd gone into my divorce thinking I was the victim of my wife's betrayal. I'd come out of it realizing I was the hero of my own story. a man who'd refused to accept a relationship that diminished him, who'd fought for his own dignity even when it cost him everything he thought he wanted. Jessica had been right about one thing. Love doesn't always fit into conventional boxes, but neither does self-respect. And given the choice between a love that required me to betray myself and a life that allowed me to honor my own worth, I'd chosen correctly. Some endings aren't happy or sad. They're just necessary. My marriage to Jessica had been necessary for me to learn what I would and wouldn't accept in a relationship. Our divorce had been necessary for me to discover that I was strong enough to walk away from someone I loved when they refused to love me the way I deserved. And this new beginning, sitting on my deck with a woman who valued honesty as much as I did, was necessary for me to understand that real love doesn't require you to compromise your fundamental values. It enhances them. Jessica had asked me to accept that her ex would always have a place in her life. I'd said okay, and then I'd made sure that I wouldn't have a place in hers. It was the best decision I'd ever made.